For many years, all that the outside world knew was that the independence leader and first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Patrice Lumumba, had died. He was said to have been cheaply buried in an unmarked grave, later exhumed and eventually dismembered, with his body parts dissolved in sulfuric acid while the bones were ground and scattered. However, before we go into the gloomy details of how and who killed this African statesman, let's have a look at the life and times of Patrice Lumumba. Born on July 2, 1925, in Katakokombe, Belgian Congo, now Democratic Republic of the Congo, Patrice Emery Lumumba was a Congolese independence leader and politician who served as the first Prime Minister of the independent Democratic Republic of the Congo, then known as Republic of the Congo, from June 24 to September 5, 1960. In his 30s, Lumumba played a significant role in the transformation of his country from a colony of Belgium into an independent country where he was popular as a Pan-Africanist and an African nationalist, which made him lead his party, the Congolese National Movement Party, from 1958 until his brutal assassination in 1961. Shortly after Congo's independence and the ascension of Lumumba as Prime Minister in 1960, a rebellion broke out in the army, which marked the beginning of the Congo crisis, and Lumumba appealed to the United Nations and the United States for help to suppress the Belgian-supported Katangan rebels led by Moise Sombe. However, the both refused and the Prime Minister turned to the Soviet Union for support. This plea led to growing differences with the President, Joseph Kasavubu, and his Chief of Staff, Joseph Désiré Mobutu, later known as Mobutu Sese Seko, was a Banga. Lumumba's action also conflicted with the United States and Belgium, who were in opposition to the Soviet Union as a result of the Cold War. Patrice Lumumba's contemporaries described him as an elegant dresser and a flexible dancer, brilliant and articulated, and no one could rival him for the national leadership, as there was only ever going to be one popular winner in the 1960 elections. Thus, at 34, Lumumba became Congo's Prime Minister, just as the country's colonial master, Belgium, prepared to grant it independence on June 30, 1960. While being a country's #1 leader is one thing, exerting power and authority is another different thing entirely. Without control of the nation's armed forces, Lumumba's power was just on paper, his political legitimacy like many crumbled ballot papers, ready to be burnt. The Prime Minister's failure to deal with the army's mutiny that started in July 1960, together with a scheming Belgium encouraging the Katanga secession because of its rich mineral, marked the beginning of his end. Lumumba then went on to dance with the evil of that era, the Soviet Union, inviting Nikita Khrushchev to send military support to put down another rebellion in his country after the United Nations and the US had rejected his plea. But with the West still in agony over Fidel Castro's takeover of Cuba, they would never forgive him of his romance with Moscow. They viewed him as a communist instead of a Pan-African nationalist. Thus, the process of Lumumba's political elimination began, which chiefly involved the United States and Belgium, who were privately authorizing agents to get rid of the Congo's first and only elected prime minister. In the end, Lumumba's Congolese enemies, supported by Washington and Brussels, placed him under house arrest and beat him nearly to death before finally flown across the country to secessionist Katanga on January 17, 1961, where he was driven out into a secluded place and disfigured by gunshot. Lumumba was shoddily buried in an unmarked grave, later exhumed and eventually dismembered, with his body parts dissolved in sulfuric acid while the bones were ground and scattered. The Belgian thug responsible for his death pulled out 2 of his teeth capped with gold as souvenirs. No statement on Lumumba's death was released until 3 weeks later, despite rumors that he was dead. On February 13, 1961, his death was formally announced over the Katangan radio. After the announcement of Lumumba's death, street protests were organized in several European countries. In Belgrade, protesters sacked the Belgian embassy and confronted the police, and in London, a crowd marched from the Trafalgar Square to the Belgian embassy, where a letter of protest was delivered and where protesters clashed with police. In New York, a demonstration at the United Nations Security Council turned violent and spilled over into the streets. At a time of a soaring hope for an independence-era Africa, what happened to Lumumba during his premiership still matters, especially in Pan-African affairs. Unfortunately, those responsible for Lumumba's death are yet to be prosecuted, even unto this day. Nevertheless, 5 years after his brutal assassination in 1966, Patrice Lumumba's image was rehabilitated by the Mobutu regime and he was proclaimed a national hero and a martyr in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. By a presidential decree, the Brower's house, site of Lumumba's brutal torture on the night of his murder, became a place of pilgrimage in the Congo. On June 30, 2018, a Lumumba Square was inaugurated in Brussels, Belgium. The square is situated at the entrance of the Matonge neighborhood and was inaugurated 58 years after the Declaration of Independence of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 1964, Malcolm X, an American human rights activist, declared Patrice Lumumba the greatest black man who ever walked in the African continent.